So the divisional round of the NFL playoffs is done. That means we're down to the final four and 2 games coming up on Sunday to determine who will go to the Super Bowl with a chance to win the Lombardi Trophy. What that also means as a consequence is that 4 teams now have seen their draft position for the 2021 NFL Draft officially be locked in. So we know the order for picks 1 through 28. And as a result, as I promised with each round of the playoffs, I was going to come back once a week and give you an updated 2021 NFL mock draft. And if you want to get updated for future mock drafts or other video content from this channel, make sure you smash the subscribe button and then click the bell, what the hell, and set it up so you can be notified when future videos are set up. And then make sure you follow the show on Twitter too. Follow me on Twitter. Yeah, we talk about sports, foosball, basketball. We talk about other life things. It'll be a grand old time. You can check out the mock. It's 1 round this time. All 32 picks in the description box down below. I know some of you just click on it to look at it and then criticize my mock. You know, even though we are still 3+ months away from the NFL draft, and a ton is going to change between now and then. But hey, that's part of the nature of the beast. It is fun. You look at the draft and this go round, you see some changes. Some picks stay the same. Some players are changing. And you expect that to continue over the next few months. I think the biggest piece I want to talk about today is the potential ramifications of what's going on with Deshaun Watson and the situation with the Houston Texans. So I think it's a pretty big deal, and especially if something were to happen, it certainly would shake up the landscape of this year's NFL draft, you would expect, in terms of some way, shape, or form. And I don't know if I'm going to do a separate video about it yet. I may, we'll see. But for now, we'll talk about it here, instead of me just talking about the same players and the same teams. When you look at this situation, you know, let's just humor me for a second and assume that Deshaun Watson, regardless if they hire Eric Bieniemy or Leslie Frazier or somebody else to be the next Houston Texans head coach, assume for a second that Deshaun Watson does go to the lengths and levels that he wants to be traded, and he's willing to waive his no trade clause to go to certain places, and the Houston Texans are willing to oblige him with his request. If that is true, and that is the case, and that's ultimately what happens, you're going to see some teams incredibly desperate to go and get a guy like this, because to be able to get a young quarterback that hasn't even really truly entered the peak, the prime of his career, available in any way, shape, or form, we just don't see that a whole lot. You just really don't. You'll see trades for other quarterbacks, and sometimes even involving first-round picks like Carson Palmer, like Sam Bradford, or going back to my Chicago Bears over a decade ago, probably the most notable one in recent time, where a young quarterback was traded within the first few years of being drafted by his team and sent somewhere else. You know, Jay Cutler went from the Broncos to the Bears, and the Bears paid a big bounty to go get him and didn't really get a whole lot out of it, frankly. But Deshaun Watson is a different beast. He's a different level of player. So you'd have to imagine that several teams throughout this draft process, this offseason process, that for one reason or another want or need a quarterback to build their organization around, are going to be incredibly interested. So it's less a problem for the Houston Texans of having suitors. It's being able to drive up and manipulate the asking price enough and exercise any leverage they may have in order to get the maximum return possible. And all the while hoping that Deshaun Watson doesn't sabotage them if they line up a great deal with Team A or Team B, because Deshaun would rather go to Team C. Now, if you look at the draft and you say what teams are most perfectly positioned to go get a guy like a Deshaun Watson, obviously the Jags. Now you might say the Jaguars, well, then just draft Trevor Lawrence and roll with him. Yeah, but you got to at least entertain it. Because even if Trevor Lawrence really pans out, you're hoping in 3 or 4 years he becomes the level of player that Deshaun Watson is now. And there's no guarantee that that happens. You have a pretty good, rock-solid guarantee of the player that Deshaun Watson is. No matter how good of a prospect you think Trevor Lawrence is or isn't, the reality is you just don't know what he's ultimately going to be, because who knows what could happen. And the Jaguars have cap space to build a team around him to be able to absorb his contract very easily. They have draft pick capital in order to sit there and be able to get aggressive and trade picks and still not totally deplete themselves. So there. certainly in the mix. Although I wouldn't anticipate them being a desired location or landing spot for Deshaun Watson. And let's be clear, the Houston Texans are not trading Deshaun Watson within their own division. Now, if they were going to trade him with somebody in the AFC, you can certainly look at the AFC East and you look at the Jets and the Dolphins. These are two teams that you're talking about have multiple first-round picks, two teams that are desperate for a quarterback, especially because they see what the Bills have with Josh Allen, and they want to get some of that. And you look at differing degrees, both of these teams might have a young quarterback that they could dangle as a part, not the focal point or the entirety of the package, but a part of the package that I would think could have to appeal to the Houston Texans. For the New York Jets, you could dangle Sam Darnold. You know, you could set up a situation where he picks up the fifth-year option, so the Houston Texans would have 2 years of team control at a relatively affordable cap number for an NFL starting quarterback. The Jets could sit there and trade away the second pick and maybe a future first-rounder and still have the Seahawks first-round pick this year and the Seahawks first-round pick next year and feel pretty good about themselves to come out of it where they finally get that big star that they haven't had since Broadway Joe Namath playing in that New York market, which certainly wouldn't be a bad thing for the NFL. Yeah, Houston's a top 5-6 market in the league, but New York's number one by a wide margin. If you can get a star like Deshaun Watson there, you would like to see that happen. You know, whether Deshaun would want to play in New York, whether he'd have enough confidence in that organization with their history and track record, it's a different conversation. But they certainly would be an appealing destination, and they have the draft pick capital for sure, and a form of a young quarterback that they could dangle in a trade that makes them very appealing. So do the Miami Dolphins. And perhaps even more so because Tua only has 1 year under his belt where Sam Darnold has 3. The Dolphins could do the same type of thing with what the Jets are talking about. The Dolphins could sit there and trade away the 3rd overall pick, dangle Tua, dangle another first rounder, still have the 18th pick in this year's draft, you know, and not terribly, horribly hinder or hamper themselves in terms of future draft pick capital and leverage and flexibility. So they've got to be ones that you've got to be looking at here. You could throw out there as a wild card, maybe a team like the Carolina Panthers. Bring Deshaun Watson back to the Carolinas because it was in the Carolinas that he enjoyed his success in college at Clemson. He had granted South Carolina, but yeah, it's close enough. It's Carolinas. Who gives a shit? But, you know, that's a team. You've got Matt Rule there. He knows that Teddy Bridgewater is the ultimate bridge quarterback. He is not a long-term answer. They need a long-term answer. And where you're sitting at pick 8, you might end up in a situation where you're talking about the 3rd or 4th best quarterback in the draft potentially being there for you or having to move up potentially to even get the 3rd one if you really covet that 3rd-rated quarterback. If you're the Carolina Panthers, you've at least got to be interested. You've got to be making the call. You've got to be making an offer. And in this case, you're willing to give up probably the 31st round picks because you understand the value that a franchise quarterback can bring because Cam brought you a lot of value in the previous decade. Now, if you bring in a better version of a franchise quarterback in Deshaun Watson, like you can live with the short-term cost of giving up and surrendering a couple of first-round picks. That said, just doesn't seem like an incredibly likely situation or scenario to play out. The 49ers, on the other hand, are in a position where they can feel confident that they've still got some good pieces on defense. They've got some good pieces on offense. They can't count on Jimmy G, even though he's Jimmy Garbage Pail anyways. But regardless, the folks that are going to say, well, they win a lot of games with him when he's a starter, and that is factually true. But now quarterbacks a team wins or quarterback stat, whatever. But the bigger problem is you just can't count on Jimmy G to play a full season, and they have the flexibility and the potential to get out from Jimmy G's contract with very little dead cap loss in 2021. If you can go out there into the marketplace and offer 3 first-round picks for a Deshaun Watson with some of the under infrastructure that San Francisco has in place and Kyle Shanahan being the play caller and the offensive mastermind, like that's got to be an appealing situation for Deshaun Watson. Certainly, I would think, would be an appealing situation for the San Francisco 49ers because he would represent a seismic shift for that organization. You'd like to think that, hey, maybe Atlanta would sit there and trade away Matt Ryan as part of a package just to throw him in and bring in Deshaun Watson. That ain't happening. You'll notice one team I'm not mentioning here, the Chicago Bears. Look, frankly, I don't know, even if the Texans are willing to trade Deshaun Watson or are going to trade him, I don't even know if that's the case. But even if they were, why the hell would they want to deal with Chicago? You get the 20th overall pick this year? Whoopee. You're almost entirely looking at having to sit there and get back draft pick capital and defensive players with high contracts that you already don't have room for because you're over the cap. So you're trying to dump a J.J. Watt too. You know, the Bears just, and from a Deshaun Watson standpoint, why the hell would you want to be traded to a place where you don't know if the head coach is going to be there past next year? If the general manager might not be there past next year? The hell would you want to go into that uncertain environment? You're already trying to get out of one dumpster fire. Why would you want to enter into another one? If anything, you're talking about a team picking in that range that you would sit there and say, okay, you know, this is a team that could be a player for him. It's the Washington football team. They're the ones that, you know, had to cut Dwayne Haskins before he'd even finished his second season. You know, this was a team that ultimately made the playoffs. It's obvious they don't have a quarterback of the future there. Also picking at 19, there's no guarantee that they get a quarterback of the future there. Like, they'd have to be all in. But again, I don't see the great match there. If Deshaun Watson's going to be traded, and I still wonder whether or not that's actually going to happen, I would totally anticipate it comes down to the Jets and Dolphins. Like, those two teams in the AFC East. And maybe there's a preference there, if you're the Texans, that you don't want to trade him anywhere in the AFC. But at least if you trade him in the East. It's not so bad, but yeah, I don't know. As far as this quarterback class, though, I also wonder, like, even with the Deshaun Watson coming down the market, are some of these teams willing to not go after Deshaun Watson and give up the bounty that it would require? Because that could be potentially very, very damaging to your organization to give up that much in terms of draft pick capital for, yes, an established superstar quarterback, I grant you, but maybe you feel better about, hey, we don't have to tie up nearly as much salary cap space into one of these young guys. We can draft them, mold them, develop them, make them our own, build around them instead of trying to shoehorn an established quarterback in that we've got to change everything around. Like, so you could see, like, that's where I would think Atlanta sitting there at pick 4, if they're ready to prepare for life after Matt Ryan, which I would expect them to be in this draft, but could be surprised. You know, then even if they had the flexibility, I don't know they'd be going out and getting into Deshaun Watson. You know, maybe, but I would doubt it. Like, I think they'd be content to draft a Justin Fields or a Zach Wilson, whichever one of them fell to them. This is my thoughts. You guys can certainly weigh in the comments and let me know what you think about the Deshaun Watson saga. Like, is he going to stay with the Houston Texans? If he's going to get traded, who do you think he's going to get traded to? Who do you think should be making the call to trade for him? You guys let me know. And yes, Bears fans, the other thing, you're probably pissed off because you see me having him take an offensive tackle instead of somebody like Mac Jones. You know, there's two reasons for that. One, even if a quarterback fell to him that I've valued and thought was really, really good, I know this organization would pass on him. Two, I've slotted an offensive lineman there because, yes, it's a team need, but more so just to troll you and piss you off. Because the reality is, why in the fuck would I want Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace? Oh, communication and collaboration. Yuck, gosh. Why would I want those two guys who are basically lame ducks at this point? Nothing for certain past 2021. Why would I want to invest a first-round pick in their choice at quarterback when the last time the Bears general manager took a quarterback in the first round, it was frickin' Trubisky? You got to be insane. I don't want that to happen. Because now you sit there and let's say the Bears go and draft somebody like a Mac Jones at pick 20, or they trade up a little bit to get somebody like him, or a Trey Lance. You know, I'll leave Trey Lance out of this. Let me say like a Mac Jones. Like, okay. Then even if Nagy and Pace gets fired, chances are the new regime's going to come in and get saddled with the previous regime's quarterback choice. And, you know, it's just, no. Now we're talking about Trey Lance with the elite physical upside, different story. But, you know, then you're also talking about the Bears, like, how much more draft pick capital can you give up and not keep? Like, at some point in time, that cycle's got to stop too. So you can certainly review my picks, all 32 of them for round 1, in the comment section. Bears fans, you can rant away with your flaming keyboard figures of fire and tell me how much you hate me for what I've done. And then for everybody, you know, let me know what you think, what's going to happen in the Deshaun Watson situation, who should be in the market for him, who ultimately will end up with Deshaun Watson as their starting quarterback in 2021. That's probably the most operative question of all.